John Musker, the legendary animator and writer for Disney, had some things to say about the company in a recent interview where he was calling out their current practices of, just trying to focus on sequels and franchise and other things like that, as well as their insistence on putting their own political messaging at the forefront of all their projects as opposed to just concentrating on entertaining the audience. Now, a lot of people might not necessarily know who John Musker is, and that's fine. I can't expect everyone to know who all the animators and writers are for Disney. So I pulled up his IMDb just to give a quick recap of some of the stuff that he's been involved with. Some of the ones in the highlights here. His writer on Hercules, Aladdin, Little Mermaid, most recently Moana. And just look at the time jump here between 89 and Little Mermaid and 2016 for Moana. So this guy has been around the company for quite some time, writing many of their movies, but also he was an animator for the company as well and worked on projects like Pocahontas, Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, Rescuers Down Under. So he was around during the Disney Renaissance when pretty much everything that they were churning out has become a classic since then, or at least most of the things. And maybe I'm just saying that because that was my childhood, but still, I'm sure there's a lot of people who would agree with me that the Disney Renaissance was one of the best, or if not the best era of Disney movies. But I digress. Let's get back to this article. This is coming from Cartoon Brew, where they're reporting on this interview that John Musker just gave. In a new interview with Spanish newspaper El País, Musker spoke about the need for a course correction at Walt Disney Animation Studios and the need to put entertainment and storytelling ahead of messaging. And he has since been retired from the company. It says right here, he retired 6 years ago. So he's free to talk about the company and it doesn't have any recourse to him whatsoever. So this is kind of his honest opinions on the current state of Disney as someone who has worked there as recently as 2016. We weren't trying to be woke, although I understand the criticism. The classic Disney films didn't start out trying to have a message. They wanted you to get involved in the characters and the story and the world, and I think that's still the heart of it. You don't have to exclude agendas, but you have to first create characters who you sympathize with and who are compelling. I think they need to do a course correction a bit in terms of putting the messaging secondary behind entertainment and compelling story and engaging characters. He also talks about how back in the 90s, underneath Jeffrey Katzenberg, there was a lot less oversight over individual projects. So they did feel like they had more cohesive vision. Compare that to more modern movies, like when he says with Moana, there's so many cooks in the kitchen. It's like 15 people in charge of it trying to direct the movie, and it's constantly changing and things like that. So you get less of a coherent vision, but that's another issue entirely. Let's get back to this whole thing about putting messaging and character first and foremost, because I do think entertainment is the primary thing a movie and TV show should do. I mean, that's the whole point of it. It's about entertaining the audience, and you can have messaging in it, like he says, but it has to be done not to the detriment of the overall story. Like a lot of people will try to point out something like Sarah Connor, for instance, because a lot of people use her as an example. Like, this is how you make a strong female character. And there's like the crazy people online who will say like, well, if that was released today, people would call Sarah Connor woke. And I don't think that's necessarily the case, because we have more modern examples of stuff like that, of a female character that people like. Alita Battle Angel, I think, was a good example because that came out at the time of Captain Marvel, and people liked Alita Battle Angel, didn't like Captain Marvel, and people were saying like, oh, well, you're just sexist. It's like, well, no, then why did they like Alita? It's like, the difference is you have one character who is flawless and one character who has flaws and struggles. And that's what makes a compelling story, because when you're trying to push some type of agenda, when you're trying to say like women are just as good and just as capable as men, if not even better than men, well, then you create flawless characters in your stories. And that's not entertaining for an audience member to watch. What's entertaining is to see a character with flaws and struggles and watching them overcome those struggles, because that's what makes an entertaining movie. And this is the kind of stuff that I think Musker is talking about when he's saying their focus on putting their agenda first and foremost interferes with the quality of the entertainment. And you need to focus on entertainment first. And if you do that, you can actually create something that has your message in it that resonates better with audiences. And that's one thing that's kind of been to the detriment of Disney in recent years, because they have been focusing on their own political agenda. And this is something that CEO Bob Iger has essentially acknowledged, but at the same time, he says they're going to stop doing that, but also they're not going to stop doing this. This was coming after their Q1 earnings call this year, where he says they want to kind of put a stop to the whole woke stuff, but then he kind of backpedals on this, or is like wishy-washy about it, because he has said similar statements in the past before that yeah, they're going to stop doing culture war stuff. They're just going to focus on entertaining the audience. And we haven't seen that actually transpire. I've always believed that we have a responsibility to do good in the world, but we know our job is not to advance any kind of agenda, he said on a live streamed meeting. Well, I could agree with him on that, but then he pretty much immediately contradicts himself. For as long as I'm in the job, I'm going to continue to be guided by a sense of decency and respect, and we'll always trust our instincts. This is Bob Iger's political answer, where he's not really saying anything. He's just trying to be as milquetoast as possible, but it really doesn't work because if you listen to what he's saying, where they're trying to make entertaining products, but at the same time, they're being guided by their own sense of decency and values. Well, what about if their values run contradictory to a large segment of the audience? Well, that's when you alienate large segments of the audience. Like, according to Disney, they think their values are to pander to as many people as possible, or they say representation and they want to represent as many groups as possible, but that's ultimately just pandering. Whenever they say representation, just substitute it with pandering and the sentence still works, because you get something like Lightyear where they're like, we want to represent LGBT people, even though it really doesn't make sense, but they're saying we want to represent those people. So we're going to have a lesbian couple in Lightyear. And a large segment of the audience is like, we don't want to watch that. We're not interested in your messaging. So they don't watch the movie. And as a result, the movie was a colossal failure for the studio. Versus you get something like Coco, where they're saying we're going to represent Latino people. Well, okay. It made sense for the story that they're telling. It was a positive movie. A lot of people liked it. And it didn't feel like it was pandering or anything like that. In fact, it was good for people who might not be predisposed to know much about that culture or Day of the Dead or anything like that. And that's the type of movies that they should be making. But unfortunately, those are few and far between, because it takes more talent to do that versus just plucking a bunch of different people from different groups and throwing them into your movie and saying, bam, it's representing all these groups, because that's not how you do it. You need to actually tell a story that fits with what you're trying to make. And something like Coco was a success in that. Unfortunately, it takes more talent to actually do that. And talent is something that Disney writers nowadays don't really have much of, or at least the leadership at Disney aren't really cultivating that type of talent. Because I'm sure there are writers there who are better at it than they might probably be even too good for Disney, because the leadership at Disney is ultimately the ones who decide what gets made. And unfortunately, the leadership at Disney just wants to have more sequels, remakes, reboots, and other things like that. And the writers are just trying to figuring out like, well, okay, I guess we can do this. This is something that Musker was trying to talk about, where he was saying there's just too many people having too much oversight over all their individual projects. They don't really foster an environment that allows talent underneath them to flourish. So you might have good writers, but they're not allowed to do their job because you got the people up at the top of the company who are just insistent on throwing in various check boxes or whatever, even if it doesn't make sense to the overall story. And this is a problem with them, because it really just interferes with their whole bottom line. And it really just goes to show that the people running the company don't actually know how to make good movies or good animation. This is something that necessarily isn't a new thing, because Musker even talked about how back in the early days of CG animation, when that started coming about, they were wanting to remake a lot of their older projects in CG animation. Disney management had proposed that they remake all of their films in CG animation. I told them I'd commit Harikari first, he told them. Of course, Disney continues to remake many of their most popular animated features, including the upcoming remake of Moana. I hope they do it well, Musker said, but we have nothing to do with it. This was definitely Musker giving his political answer, saying, I wish them well, but at the same time, don't blame me if it's bad, because I have absolutely nothing to do with it. But in all honesty, Disney would behoove themselves to listen to people like Musker and some other animators and just the creative aspects of the company, because where it currently stands, you have the executives who aren't filmmakers, they're executives trying to dictate what the movie is being made. And not only that, it's worse than that, because if you just had one executive, that's one thing. But when you have like 15 all given notes and given their own input, suddenly you just get something that's a complete mess. And I think Disney would be better off if they started listening to the creative aspects, like the people that they hire. You hire competent directors, you hire competent writers. You don't just hire someone to do the job and then the executive is the one telling them exactly what to do and micromanaging it the whole way. That's not how you create good movies. You create good movies by bringing in people who are talented. Someone has a good pitch for a Disney animated movie, you hear them out. If you like what they have to say, then you let them make the movie they want to make, and you just kind of cut the checks. Yes, I'm not saying spend a couple $100 million on the movie. They should be significantly lower unless they've actually proven themselves. But I think this is something that Disney as a company is unwilling or incapable of doing, because I think, frankly, they're just too big for what they're actually trying to accomplish. And I think it's just going to eventually catch up with them. But let me know what you think about all this in the comment section below. Do you agree with Musker, disagree with him? And if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest entertainment news. And don't forget to like and share the video, because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.